Mm, Okay. All right. Wonderful.
All right, Marlon, we are live on Facebook and everyone is in from the waiting room, so we're good to go.
All right. Well, good morning, good morning, good morning. We appreciate all of you for joining us on today. And without further ado, I would like to welcome you to our dear distinguished guests. My name is Reverend Dr. Marlon Tillman. I am the pastor of Ames United Methodist Church and a leader in Bridge, Maryland Incorporated, a network of faith-based organizations and religious leaders working for transformational justice across our state. I am also a proud member of Maryland Youth Justice Coalition, affectionately known as MYJC, the sponsor of this press conference today. You've been invited for more details relating to MyJC's report released today concerning youth justice in our state. The report, entitled What's Best for Kids is Best for Everyone, is available on MyJC's website, mdyouthjustice.org, and we have several hard copies that would have been available had we been in live. It is our honor to welcome you to frame our discussion and to introduce our speakers, who include advocates, directly impacted people, and legislators who care about children in and outside of the legal system. We will, of course, conclude with an opportunity for questions. So as we get started, please join me for a moment of prayer. Dear Master of the Universe, God, we invite you into this space to guide our words and thoughts for justice for our children and safety in our communities. May we speak with clarity that educates, and may we share with compassion the concerns that liberate minds and hearts. And may we communicate with emotions that connect to the divine source that inspires and demands care and not cages for our children. In your most precious and holy name, in the name of my Savior, Jesus Christ, I pray. Amen. So I'd like to offer, before we get into other speeches, a moral perspective. I believe we can agree that society has a responsibility and privilege to raise children to be respectful, courteous, kind, and loving. These are all values that are common in all faiths, religions, and belief systems. What is equally true is that children, until the age of emotional and cognitive maturity, are easily influenced by the people they respect or who say they care about their well-being. However, the moment that society forgets their responsibility, privilege, and knowledge about when youth mature in as adults, we begin to treat them like adults prematurely, which leads to their poor decisions and bad behavior. I also trust that members of MyJC believe in our hashtag that children need care and not cages. We believe that it is our responsibility to listen to children and directly impacted people to address the real proponents of crime, which is poverty and the lack of resources to aid in raising a child to have the potential that is inside of all of them. And any legislative system in society that perpetuates an eye for an eye approach to justice will ultimately be blind to what is truly necessary, and that is to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God. To take a child's right to have legal counsel to expedite the judicial process says that time is more important than that child's development and future. Dear lawmakers, please fix the system. Don't break the child to fit or expedite a judicial process. One more time, please fix the system. Don't break the child to fit or expedite a judicial process. And so we will now hear from advocates, directly impacted people, and lawmakers who will present facts to calm your fears about public safety and how to care for our children in and outside the legal system. So let's resume with my invitation to invite Josh Robner with the Sentencing Project to speak on the MyJC Executive Report.
Thank you so much, Reverend. It's really a delight to be here today and to be a part of the Maryland Youth Justice Coalition myself. My name is Josh Rovner. That's R-O-V-N-E-R. I'm Director of Youth Justice with the Sentencing Project, a research and advocacy think tank in Washington, D.C., though I myself live in Silver Spring, Maryland. We're here to talk about where we are as a state and who we want to be. It's so important to focus on facts and not fears. We're still emerging from a very tough era, one that was especially hard on our children and teens. We can look back to 2019 when this legislature sought to right-size our justice system by appointing a commission, understanding that too many of our kids were in the juvenile justice system for too long, harming their futures. We must be serious about safety, ensuring the system focuses attention on the most serious cases, the most difficult cases, instead of arresting elementary school kids or locking up any of our kids on low-level charges. These changes were recommended by the JJRC, the Juvenile Justice Reform Commission, and then passed by large majorities in the Assembly, having heard from national experts who'd studied these issues and seen the many ways that justice system involvement is toxic for our children. We're here to say that they took steps in the right direction, that the legislature was right to do so, but there is still so much more to do. First, the state needs to restore, expand, and support the age-appropriate supports outside of the courts. Second, the legislature needs to preserve the reforms that have right-sized the justice system and protected our children's rights under the Constitution. Third, the legislature simply must reform Maryland's indefensible and appallingly aggressive practice of sending kids to the adult criminal justice system hundreds of times a year, knowing that the adult system is much worse for our children than the juvenile system is. Many of us have lived through a time when youth, especially youth of color, were unfairly blamed for very real increases in crime. During the super predator era, elected leaders followed constituents' fears instead of following the evidence of what works to keep our kids and our communities safe. As a result of that fear and a lack of leadership, vastly more of our teens were locked up or sent to the adult system. We must learn from that era, not repeat its mistakes. We must follow the facts and not the fears. So, Reverend, will you please continue?
Thank you, Josh, for that presentation. I will now invite Natasha Dodich from OPD to now offer her perspective for today.
Good morning, and thank you, MYJC, and thank you to all those gathered today who understand, but most importantly, support the ideas that we must protect children, and that is what will truly lead to safer and stronger communities. It is imperative that we continue to invest in children and communities, because this is where we will actually achieve public safety. Maryland must invest in communities, ensure developmentally appropriate responses, and protect children by prioritizing and keeping children safe and reducing justice involvement. And this means investing in all communities, because Maryland's Black children are still overrepresented in every stage of the juvenile justice and criminal legal system. We must protect our children, and the protective factors that we must look to, those factors that will make it less likely that a child will become involved in the juvenile justice system, include positive relationships with parental figures who care about their development, inclusion in peer groups that positively influence the child, activities that actually promote decision-making and critical thinking, and most importantly, interventions. And the interventions themselves must be swift and certain. We must not prolong the imposition of interventions. We must not expand a period of probation simply to allow the Department of Justice additional time to do what they need to do. They must react to the needs of the child swiftly, and by being certain, providing for the direct needs of the child. These are the interventions that are needed and important, because children cannot simply be viewed as miniature adults. The General Assembly passed the JJRA to implement protective factors and other developmental appropriate responses. Services and support reduce rearrests and keep children out of the criminal legal system. Developmental appropriate responses must be paramount. We have a duty to protect the constitutional rights of our children. That includes protecting the basic protections afforded to adults. And we must recognize that children are different, and harsh punitive approaches are cruel and unusual. This is why the General Assembly passed the Child Interrogation Protection Act in 2022. The SIPA hotline protects our children. The Office of the Public Defender mans these hotlines with trained attorneys who are trained to explain the law in age-appropriate ways, trained to answer questions, trained to explain the next steps and help children to understand what the process actually looks like. And I say to you that SIPA also helps to improve investigations, because SIPA helps communities trust in the systems and the processes, but it also helps communities trust law enforcement. In that, SIPA only requires the children to be advised of their rights by an attorney. It does not prohibit investigations. It does not prohibit the interviewing of witnesses. And in fact, SIPA aids in helping to protect against false confessions. I say to you that we must take all the steps to protect all the children. We must allow time for the JJRA and SIPA to work as intended, and we must invest in communities and not cages. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a number of distinguished legislators here today, and we want to acknowledge all of them. But we've selected 3 to speak today. But before I invite them to speak, I would like to acknowledge Delegate Simpson, Delegate Phillips, and Delegate Kaufman for being here today. We appreciate you standing with us today during this occasion. So I'll first ask that Senator Carter, if you would give us your comments on today.
Thank you very much. Good morning. It's still morning.
Yes.
I want to say thank you to MYJC and all of the allies and advocates that have pushed so hard for much needed reforms in our juvenile justice system in Maryland. I also want to say thank you to our challengers and the resistors, because they further strengthen our position by making false allegations not backed up by data and forcing us to be better and make our arguments stronger and our advocacy greater. Maryland was one of the worst states in this country in many areas of the way that we treated children, mistreated children, and violated the human rights of children. And so finally, in 2021, we passed long overdue reforms, and we were not a leader in this country. We were a follower of many other states that are considered to be much more conservative when it comes to juvenile and criminal justice. And so we passed much needed reforms, and 2 in particular have been largely under attack. One is the Juvenile Reform Act that was based on recommendations from a council convened by former Governor Hogan and that Department of Juvenile Services, and a collaboration of stakeholders and experts across this country came up and devised those recommendations, which we implemented through legislation. The other is the Child Interrogation Protection Act, which frankly follows opinions and trends of the United States Supreme Court, as it's discussed in many different cases over a myriad of time over the last decade, the way that children's brains are not equipped cognitively to understand and interpret much of what goes on in the criminal and juvenile justice system. And so there should be age-appropriate explanations, and also that where children's liberty is at stake, they absolutely have right to counsel. And so Maryland was, again, long overdue in passing these reforms. Our system for many, many decades had failed our children and failed society. Because when we fail our children and we don't build and produce young people that can grow into productive citizens, we fail our entire society. And so these two pieces of legislation were small efforts at making the system better and building a better core group of young people, and also increasing public safety. I'm pleased to mention that any challenges to the Child Interrogation Protection Act, we've all known that they were unfounded, but we now have the opinion of our Attorney General that is basically solidified that the Child Interrogation Protection Act is 100% constitutional, and I would add absolutely necessary. And then when it comes to the Juvenile Reform Act, my goodness, we've heard so many inaccuracies, so many pieces of misinformation that sadly seek to mislead the public and even some of our own colleagues, which is why we will have some challenges, I believe, to that law this session. Now, what I think is important for everybody to focus on is the word of the last year in particular has been accountability. We need accountability for our young people, for our juveniles. I would argue that we need accountability for our adults, and those people in positions of authority that have not been honest and truthful about the law and that have blamed the law for all of the failings in the system need to be held accountable as well. It is not okay to be in law enforcement or in the office of a state's attorney or position of a state's attorney and intentionally say things like, because of the law, we can't talk to children. It is not okay to say that because of the law, police can't talk to children. It is not okay to mislead people and claim that violent crime is rocketing amongst young people because of the law, when we know that that is not correct. And we also know that the Juvenile Reform Act only dealt with misdemeanor and nonviolent offenses primarily. And so I just want to end with it is all of our responsibility, whether it's police, prosecutors, defense lawyers, legislators, members of the public, to work collaboratively to serve our children and serve society. And this pitting one against the other and spewing misinformation because of a disdain for lesser prosecution, decreased prosecution, and decreased incarceration in favor of better services, programs, and rehabilitation is something that simply cannot, will not, and should not be tolerated by this legislative body. And so I simply urge all of our colleagues to stand strong and continue along the trend of the rehabilitation that our children need. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Carter. And as I attended the press conference with Governor Moore, he mimicked that same type of accountability to be spread across all persons who are involved in this judicial system. Now, before I move on to our next presenter, the screen is so full of people. I miss Delegate Pasteur. So, Delegate Pasteur, we'd like to thank you too for being with us on here today. We'll now hear from Delegate Bartlett.
Thank you, Reverend Tillman. Senator Carter, as always, got to the point, made the point, and put a big fat explanation over the point. And I thank you for that. Excuse me. I will try not to repeat anything that you said, except for one thing I will say. Yes, the opinion of the Attorney General's office came out, and I am happy to say I was delighted when I read it to see that it confirms what we have been saying, and that is what we know to be correct, and that is the Constitution of these United States, the Fifth Amendment. As it is, the United States is the only free country, if you want to say, or industrialized country that has these Bill of Rights. And these Bill of Rights have, sometimes been controversial because the Bill of Rights are so absolute. There are times when we're not happy that someone can protest at a funeral. I certainly wasn't happy when I read the Supreme Court's decision allowing individuals to protest at a funeral. However, it is absolute. The First Amendment right is there, and we must protect it. The Fifth Amendment is also part of the Bill of Rights, and we must protect it. There is not a comma, thank God, in the Fifth Amendment that says, unless you're a child, unless you're a minor. There is no comma. It applies. And I'm very happy to learn that our Attorney General's office feels the same way. The reason why the argument in support is so strong for the Fifth Amendment applying to children is, one, because we have plenty of precedent that says that it should, and that these rights must flow as they would for an adult. But because there is a system of imbalances that already exist. The reason we as individuals do not present the case against ourselves ever. We are never obligated to present a criminal case against ourselves. And the reason for that is because of the Fifth Amendment, that we are not required to incriminate ourselves. Now, that is an area of procedure. But I think what is happening is individuals are conflating criminal procedure and criminal law. Criminal procedure is just how you even get to a trial or even get to facing a jury. Unfortunately, there are individuals who want to be the jury, the judge, all at one time. Heaven forbid we would ever reach a level where an individual loses their due process rights. And the reason why it's so strong, and this is iterated in the Attorney General opinion, is because we lose our liberty when we are facing criminal charges. Because of that, we made the bar against the government extremely high, as it should be. I am sorry, and I have been quoted for saying that, yes, it may make the job more difficult, but I can give you a litany of things and rules that I have to follow that makes my job more difficult as a representative for this great state of Maryland, but it is necessary, as my colleagues will agree, it is necessary for decency and order and for the proper processing of the things that we have to do and the parameters that we must follow, we must fall within. So with that said, I am excited about the opinion of the Attorney General. I am excited about the level of advocates and supporters we have here today. I thank Maryland Youth Justice Council for putting on this press conference and making it an online conference so that there is no reason to not say what needs to be said and for people not to hear what needs to be heard. Juvenile rights, and I'm speaking about the Child Interrogation Protection Act. those rights that were outlined in that law, it is law, despite what one may hear, it is law, and we are supposed to follow law. Juvenile rights cannot be diminished. And with respect to the JJRA, I feel the same. The rights should not be diminished. If we want to do anything to make that law better, to make more rights for children, to set up services that should have properly been set up before that we thought were in place, and we learn as we grow. And as Senator Carter said, we grow and we become better when we know better. So let's make the services for juveniles better as well. Let's fund them properly. And I am going to repeat, and I said I wouldn't, but I'm gonna, because, you know, Senator Carter said it well. Let's make everyone accountable. And by all means, let's work together and not work as adversaries, because I truly, and I hope this to be true, that we want the best interests of children, because we understand that these little people grow up to be our leaders, to be our pastors, to be our presidents. So let's make the environment and let's give them the opportunity to flourish and to succeed. And let's give them the rights of the Constitution. Thank you very much.
If I'm not sure if I'm in my right order to say this, but I'm gonna say amen anyway. Um, uh, Delegate Bartlett, thank you for that and for speaking into perhaps a fruition that we would become a council. Delegate Crutchfield, you get to bring it home as our legislator for today.
Thank you so much. Well, first of all, I want to just say to the Maryland Youth Justice Coalition, thank you for being so vigilant and continuing to work on these issues around our youth. It is important that you're here. And of course, it is important that all the legislators in the room are here as well. I want to just mention a couple of our other legislator allies who were not mentioned, and they are Delegate Kaufman, who's in the room, as well as Delegate Simpson. I do appreciate you all being here. You know, it takes us all, you know, to make this work. I don't want to repeat anything because, you know, what can I say? Senator Carter is so eloquent, as well as Delegate Bartlett. And most importantly, the bills that they have been involved in are the ones that are probably being attacked right now. And so I'm happy that they are here in the room and ready and giving all the information that you need to know about what's happening. But I do want to go back just a little bit about the JJRC and recognize really, you know, why was it established? You know, it was established because we needed to change our juvenile justice system. We needed the stakeholders. We needed everybody to be involved. And that's what happened. There were stakeholders from the state's attorney's office, law enforcement. We had data folks from all over the different universities. We had all of that, all in rooms and meetings together to figure out what was the best reform that we could possibly do here in the state of Maryland for our youth. And I do believe we came up with that. We had recommendations, and most of those recommendations are now law. And there is, again, a reason why, because we were all in the same room together. But what really bothers me most about this is that now many of those same stakeholders are actually attacking the law. And that really should concern all of us, because they were here, they were part of this, and they know that this legislation is still in its infancy. We have not given it enough time. We know that there are things that need to be put in place to ensure that it continues and that our youth are well taken care of under this legislation. So that really bothers me. And I just wanted to make that clear first off. So, you know, with that in mind, I mean, again, my observations of this is that there are many tools in a toolkit that our stakeholders are not really utilizing. They need to become more educated on the legislation, including the Juvenile Reform Act, as well as juvenile interrogation, and understand what they have, because they're not doing that right now. So that would be something. If I could have a list of, I know Christmas, the holidays have passed, but that would have been my Christmas list for people to just get that, to really get educated on that. And the other thing is that whatever challenges are coming, have the data around it. Show us what you mean, don't tell us, but show us, because we want to all be in the room regarding any kind of resolutions, anything we can do to make legislation better. We want to make sure that happens. And so those are kind of the things I just want to leave you with, because those are the things that are bothersome to me and things I think we really need to think about. But I just want to say thank you to all of you present here, because this means so much to me, because it means you really care about our youth and what comes next and how we best can resolve anything, because we all want safe communities. That's what this is all about. But we want to do it in the right way, because our youth are not adults and should not be treated as such. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm hearing a constant theme. Youth are not adults. Thank you so much. I'm actually going to change the lineup, and only those who are in the room and who are part of the steering team know that. So I'm actually going to ask Yanette to speak next, and then we'll have Jamil speak.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Yanette Emanuel, Public Policy Director for the ACLU of Maryland, and I just want to also thank our previous sponsors, Delegate Sandy Bartlett and Senator Carter and Delegate Crutchfield, and even Delegate Davis and others who aren't on this call, for all their hard work in passing this bill. It was a 3-year effort. We had a lot of discussion and we got it through, and I'm glad to see you all here still committed to protecting children, so thank you for that. As I stated, my name is Yanette Emanuel, Public Policy Director for the ACLU of Maryland, and the ACLU stands ready to defend against any attempts to repeal or water down the Child Interrogation Protection Act, which I'll reiterate is simply requires that an attorney is consulted before police interrogate a child, so that an attorney can provide age and, most importantly, developmental appropriate explanations of their Miranda rights, and also make sure that their parents are properly notified as well. In October of 2023, the city of Baltimore agreed to pay 3 men, Alfred Chestnut, Andrew Stewart, and Ransom Watkins, a total of $48 million to compensate them for the combined 108 years that they had been unjustly imprisoned on charges brought against them as teenagers. This has been called the largest penalty any Maryland jurisdiction has paid for falsely incarcerating innocent young people, but it's certainly not the only one. False confessions by children have contributed to many of these unjust outcomes, which have not only devastated their lives, but also the lives of their families. And this is one reason Maryland must preserve and prioritize the Child Interrogation Protection Act. Children are 3 times more likely to make false confessions than adults. More than 1/3 of people who have been exonerated of past convictions were children at the time of their alleged offense happened. And among the children who were 14 or younger at the time of the conviction, 86% made a false confession. And in cases of adult exonerees, by comparison, only 10% included a false confession. It is important for Marylanders to understand that since the new legislation went into effect in October of 2022, nearly 11% of calls to the SEPA hotline, which is run by the Office of the Public Defender, have involved children ages 13 and younger. SEPA seeks to protect the basic due process rights of Black and Brown children who got unfairly stopped, searched, arrested, and interrogated by police every day in Maryland. And it is imperative that we push back against any attempts or efforts to weaken this law, and we must protect children around the state. And so then we just ask you all to join us these efforts this session in fighting back against any attempts to water down these bills. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Reverend Tillman.
Thank you so much, and thank you for bringing us up to speed about the facts. Jamil, you get to bring it home, sir. You'll be our last speaker before we will then invite our other guests to offer their questions.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right. No pressure, Reverend. Miss Natasha, it's good to see you again. I'm sure you remember me, right? Again, I'm a little nervous. Actually, I just started my intern today too as well. So here with Delegate Phillips, thank you, sir. And thank you to everyone here, legislators, system stakeholders, community, and individuals. So I had to prep myself and actually write this out because I wanted to make sure I hit home because I represent our youth as an ally, as a mobilizer, as an advocate, someone who is also in long-term recovery. I actually will be celebrating 4 years on the 27th from alcohol.
Amen.
So my name is Jamel Freeman, an undergrad social work student, Delta Alpha Phi honor student. I'm a published book author as well. Can I do this? I actually wrote this book when I was in the rehab. 12,076 words. I wrote it in 28 days. Peer recovery specialist and coach, a military dependent. My father was a Master Chief in the Navy. He died by suicide at the age of 40, 4 months after my son was born. Again, I stand as a mobilizer and an educator. I stand before you today just to show you, because of lived experience myself and how I interact with the youth. This is personal for me. This isn't a job. This is my assignment because I've been where they've been at. I felt these children. I still talk to them to this day. The youth that we're all striving to find answers for while others try to determine what punishment can we give. They did not learn from their mistake. I could give you Maryland and national data and research reports. None of this will touch the cause and effect of why our children collectively feel abandoned, unheard, unsafe, or even let alone respected. This is their cry out for attention, just as when we felt unnoticed or abandoned, just as I felt when my Navy Master Chief Freeman, my father, took his life because he could not deal with life on life's terms anymore. Not even to even bring up what he had seen and what he had to do to survive actually defending our country when he went over there to Afghanistan. My dad was never the same again. My father didn't even used to drink until he went into the military. So with that being said, and I just want y'all to think about that, because just with our youth and with alcohol and drugs, why do they partake in that negative behavior? Why did my father do that? Because he wanted to forget. He didn't want to feel, because of the trauma and the stigma he's seen, let alone what he probably had to do and which he did not want to do, but he wanted to survive. I say this to you that the youth have experienced trauma in their life, are often chronological, a specific age, and these are the individuals that I interact with, 0 to 14 years old per the National Child Traumatic Network, and emotional behavior and development level at much younger levels, sometimes 5 to 10 years old younger, often emotional stuck at the age the trauma occurred. Intentional violence is what these children are exposed. Unwarranted, child physical abuse, sexual abuse, domestic violence, and or human trafficking. And I can even talk about the domestic violence because I've seen that with my dad. I grew up in that. But when you look at me, you wouldn't think that. That's the whole point. To disguise, to make you feel I'm all right. Because that's what society, that's what social media, that's what interaction, because I want you to accept me. This means that they are greater vulnerability to make they are vulnerable to make good choices, but led accountable for their choices of their chronological age. So here it is, they're stuck in their trauma, they're stuck in their stigma, so they've never even dealt with that, okay? And then when they get a certain age, because I've, at my last internship was at Goodwill Horizon Industries, the Young Adolescent Clubhouse. I went play basketball with these children, ate lunch with these children, talked with these children. And they said, Mr. Freeman, this is what's going on. The trauma stunts their growth. Our children spend more time learning. They need more time learning life skills and survival in the streets more than they do. So when they go to school, they spend more time in school and in the streets. So when they go home, it's like they have that idle time. So then they're just like They gotta go in survival mode. So when we put them in school, can they get some more support and feel safe, feel heard, and not judged when they want to talk? I think after school programming for the youth from 12 to 18 will be beneficial because their age range, specifically from 13 to 16, does not have a lot of choices for after school opportunities. They have aged out of daycare, out of they're not old enough work, so they have lots of idle time before the parents return from home. Like we say, the cliche is, an idle mind is the devil's workshop. And this ain't just children, these adults too.
Mr.
Okay.
Jamil, I appreciate your story. I'm going to ask that you tie it up a little bit.
Okay. So let's just flip the narrative here to prevent recidivism. Our youth will benefit from life skills program, enrichment and self-awareness programs, trade skills programming, cultural representation from their service provider. Let us provide a safe, enriching, culturally sensitive environment for our children. I hope I did good. Thank y'all for hearing me out.
Thank you, Jamil. So I'm going to actually invite Alice Wilkerson to lead the questions that may be coming from our press. So we will now give you that opportunity to ask questions.
Thanks, Marlon, and thank you to everyone for attending today and for speaking. If you have a question for anyone on our panel or for the coalition, please go ahead and raise your hand. Feel free to turn off your camera if you want. And then I will call on each of you. If you can let me know if you have someone in mind for your question or if it's just for anyone within the coalition, that would be really helpful. So I'm going to go with Rachel, William, David, and then Steph Quinn. So starting with Rachel.
Hi there, good morning. So I have two questions related to legislation. So this is really a question for the lawmakers. So first of all, for the two of you who sponsored the YES Act in previous years, do you plan to reintroduce it? And I'll just go ahead and ask the second question as well. There's a bill that's been introduced. It's a bipartisan sponsored bill that would kind of undo parts of the Juvenile Interrogation Act. It will SB 120. It would allow a child to consult with their parent or guardian instead of a lawyer. Would remove that requirement that they consult with a lawyer. I was just hoping that you could speak to that concept.
Senator Carter or Delegate Crutchfield, do you want to?
I'm going to say, who's that directed to?
Yeah, either one of you.
Well, I guess Senator Carter or I mean, you both sponsored the YES Act last year, so I just wanted to see if that, first of all, if that was if you planned to reintroduce that. I didn't see it pre-filed yet.
So my answer is that the YES Act is something that's also long overdue. And it's been about 14 years now since I first sponsored the bill to stop the automatic charging of children as adults. I very much believe in it, but it's been presented by leadership that this year we focus on improving and increasing our Department of Juvenile Services. And that is the focus. And so I did not feel this was the right session to reintroduce it. So I don't intend to this session, but I'm hopeful about next session.
Yeah,
and in terms of the bills to change our Child Interrogation Protection Act, there's just no reason to do it. There's been no evidence or data presented it needs to be changed. And as Delegate Bartlett and I have said, you know, the Attorney General has solidly supported the provisions of the juvenile, all of the provisions of the Child Interrogation Protection Act. So there's been no legitimate concerns that have been brought. For the record, parent is not an attorney. Parent can't stand in the stead of an attorney. So that doesn't make sense, and even the Supreme Court would agree.
And I would also like to add that the child still has the ability to speak with the parent. That doesn't go away. after speaking with counsel. That's part of the rumor that was incorrect.
Yeah, and I think also just to clarify, the law is intended to make sure that the child understands their rights. Like that's the purpose of it. And a parent cannot necessarily provide the right information to ensure that that child fully understands their rights. But that is what the legal counsel requirement is to make sure that they fully understand their rights so that they can make a really informed decision about whether or not they want to speak to police at that moment.
And I would, if I may just add
Yes.
that the attorney explains the law to the child in age-appropriate ways. So a parent is not an attorney and does not have the ability to explain the law. The attorney being present also answers legal questions that the child may have in regards to the legal process that they are entering into. The parent does not have the ability to answer legal questions, as well as this is a constitutional right that is afforded everyone regardless of their age. So simply because you are a child does not mean that you do not have constitutional rights.
Yeah. Rachel, did you have a quick follow-up on that?
I did related to the Juvenile Interrogation Protection Act, and this is specifically for Ms. Dartigue. I know that the Public Defender's Office has lost a lot of juvenile defenders. I believe that last I heard, you guys are down to somewhere in the 20s in terms of people who are considered juvenile defenders, down from over 70 a couple of years ago. I wanted to know how that affects your ability to, as you described, explain the law in a way that is age appropriate and really be able to follow through on your the things that you guys need to do as part of the Juvenile Interrogation Protection Act.
So in regards to the rights when someone is detained by police and their rights to remain silent or their decision to speak with the police, again, that is a constitutional right regardless of the person's age. Our frontline attorneys that answer the hotline are our juvenile defenders because of their regular interaction and dealings with children every day and ability to speak in age-appropriate terms. To address the fact that we are definitely in need of additional attorneys in all aspects of our agencies, we also have attorneys that have been trained to man the hotline, in addition to our attorneys who work with juveniles each and every day. So the training expands to all our attorneys who man the hotline.
Thank you. William?
If I could just quickly add one quick comment, because there was a mention about an exception to the Child Interrogation Protection Act, and I just want to flag that there is a important public safety exception in the Child Interrogation Protection Act that clearly states that if an officer reasonably believes that information sought is necessary to protect a threat to public safety, and the questions are posed to the child are narrowed in scope and only necessary to obtain information necessary to protect against public safety threat, they can still question that child. So I just want to flag that that is already in the law.
Great. William?
Thank you and good morning. Senator Carter, she mentioned about how the leadership here in the legislature is focusing on improvements among the State Department of Juvenile Services. And the report outlines several recommendations for age-appropriate resources and the like. What are some of the things that DJS could do to improve juvenile services? And that's for anyone who wants to answer, please.
Thank you for that question. Well, for my part, of course, for under the previous administration, many of the programs and services were gutted. And so we'd like to increase the resources. But what is critically important is that the Department of Juvenile Services partners with on the ground data-driven organizations that have evidence-based programs and services they offer for intervention and program and prevention and mentorship. And it's very important that the department partners with actual proven programs, ones that know and understand the children in the jurisdiction where they work. And I think that is one of our greatest focuses.
Thank you, Senator Carter. I would just add to that while we often focus on the Department of Juvenile Services, and they do have a major role to play, there are other agencies that we also need to be focusing on, you know, the Department of Health, the Department of Behavioral Health, the Department of Human Services, the Department of Education. We have more than one state agency that is focused on how we serve children in this state, and not all of the problems can be solved by DJS alone. So, you know, that is part of what we are calling on legislators to do, is to look at all of our child serving agencies and all of the services and supports that we can provide to kids and that kids need. We also want to focus on keeping kids out of the system in the first place. So if we really care about long-term public safety, we will have the best public safety outcomes if we can keep kids from becoming system involved to begin with. DJS is responding as the system after the child is already involved. So we do need to focus on those diversion and deflection services that keep kids out of the system, you know, from the beginning. And so there's a lot more that we need to do. As Senator Carter mentioned, we really have defunded these services, especially under the Hogan administration. I'm happy to provide more information. Just as one example, our youth service bureaus, we used to have 22 youth service bureaus in the state, in a number of counties. Now we only have 7 in 3 counties. And that is a prevention-focused service system that works directly with kids and their families. So we need a lot more investment in those types of services, not just focusing on DJS, which is really primarily a detention-focused agency. David, you're next.
Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Rachel and William asked what was on my mind, but I'd like to expand a little bit about what you guys are talking about, more investment in DJS. The Secretary Vincent Schiraldi says that the agency is not prepared to handle the influx of juvenile violent crimes. And just 2 weeks ago, he said programs, as you guys have mentioned, to help young people have been slashed. Well, what do lawmakers have in mind in terms of, in addition to partnerships with the private sector, will there be a shift in funds, recommendations to the governor to put more money into DJS? What's on the table?
I think that's a great question. I think we would all love to know what's on the table, but I have not seen any proposals so far about how that funding might be allocated. Certainly funding and putting more resources into programs and services. Like I mentioned, those youth service bureaus, I think that they have an ask of 2.4 million to restore their services. But they are actually under the Governor's Office of Youth Services and Crime Prevention. They're not under the DJS budget. So that is why it's important that we look at all of the state agencies who serve our kids and what their roles are. You know, the Behavioral Health Services Administration, we know that our behavioral health services for kids are woefully underfunded. There's not enough beds available. There's not enough treatment centers available. I think that we heard testimony in the House Judiciary Committee that we don't have any, I want to say, substance use treatment centers, like residential treatment centers for youth in the state of Maryland. That is shameful. That is absolutely a part of the problem. And we need to be focusing again on all of our agencies and all of the types of services that our kids need, not just DJS. DJS is important, but it's not just DJS. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add to David's question. Josh?
So
I
I'm not sure
do.
if I can answer David's question, but I do want to answer Ford's question. I was actually looking for my notes. We had a meeting with DGS about a month or so ago, and the secretaries of Public Safety and Corrections and the secretaries of Human Services are meeting with them bi-weekly to look at proactive things that can be done for ages 13 through 25. So there is work that's going on behind the scenes, and hopefully those things will flourish in the days and weeks to come.
And last, I'd like to add that there is federal grant money that is available. I am proud to say that Anne Arundel County got $400,000, I believe it was, for their youth diversion program. So there are, and through the federal funding. So there are federal programs available. And I know that the governor's office and the and GOCAP under the direction of Dorothy Lenning will do all that they can to make sure that individuals meaning these nonprofits or even the police, because that funding was done through Anne Arundel County Police, to make sure that individuals are aware of the federal funding that is available.
Great. Steph, I'm going to turn to you for the last question.
I'm sorry, Alice, if I may, I'd like to respond to David's point about youth in the adult system. You know, Secretary Schiraldi for a long time has been a supporter of keeping youth in the keeping youth out of the adult system. He shares that position with the CDC and with the National Research Council for the very obvious reason that adult courts are not built to treat young people. As things stand right now, young people charged with very serious offenses are often detained in juvenile facilities. When convicted, they are often, as part of a plea bargain, sent back to the juvenile system. There is no doubt that many of the kids who are initially charged as adults are not sentenced as if they are adults. I would urge the secretary to make sure that he is building a system that continues to support youth, even those who are charged with very serious offenses, as it is already doing, and as the secretary already knows that he's doing.
Great. Now I'll turn to Steph.
Hi, everyone. I was wondering, kind of along the same lines of Alice's point about more than DJS just being involved in kind of like the interlinking problems. Is there a need for greater communication and collaboration between the various agencies that work with kids and families who might be in need of services or need various other kinds of assistance? And if that is a problem, what role can legislators play in trying to address that? So I guess that's mostly for the lawmakers, but if others have sticking points or bottlenecks that might need to be addressed, yeah, I'd be interested in hearing that too.
Yeah, so I'll just jump in with that really quickly. As Reverend Tillman was just mentioning, we do know that there are a number of agencies that are meeting on a regular basis to coordinate. This is actually something that happened for a long time. There used to be sort of like a governor's children's cabinet, I believe, under Governor O'Malley. And that ended at some point, I think, in the O'Malley years.
The 1 o'clock bell hearing.
Maya, can you mute Delegate Kaufman? Okay. So the governor's office used to have sort of like a children's cabinet that met on a regular basis. That sort of like dissolved and went away, and I don't believe was revived under Governor Hogan. It has not been officially brought back, but we do know that Governor Moore has his secretaries meeting on a regular basis to sort of like work through some of these challenges. So I think we want to see more of that. That's a step in the right direction. And I think that we will see more system improvements as a result of that communication. Rachel, did you have one more question? And then we're going to wrap up.
Sorry, lots of questions here. My last question, there's something that a lot of critics have said about DJS is that they've pointed out that jurisdiction for the juvenile system ends at age 21. And they've complained often that the Department of Juvenile Services doesn't seem to have enough time to work with kids. Is there any talk among legislators of trying to change the age cap for the Department of Juvenile Services to allow their jurisdiction to extend past the age of 21? I know some states have age 26 or 28 or what have you.
Is there a legislator who wants to answer that? And if not, I'm going to turn it over to Josh. I'm not aware of any proposals right now. I know it is a topic that has come up before, but Josh has some information, I think, about other states and how they handle that, and can just speak to the issue generally.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth noting that most states do the same thing that Maryland does. It's the juvenile jurisdiction extending through age 21. That's typical of most states. If there are legislative proposals to consider extending jurisdiction, I think MYJC would be open to that as part of other packages worth discussing.
Steph, did you have one more question?
I did. Yeah, I just had a follow-up. Yeah, thanks for your response about the secretaries meeting on a regular basis. That's helpful to know. But I just wanted to follow up and ask, I mean, it seems like from some of the bills that have already been proposed that some of them are aimed at, you know, for instance, when does a DJS intake officer have to forward a case file to a state's attorney? Or in what case might law enforcement might be required to refer a situation to a social services department for a neglect investigation? So I guess apart from like the leadership of executive agencies, like on a nuts and bolts level, like kind of where kids are actually encountering these agencies, like is there a problem with communication and collaboration at that level? And if so, what do you think could help?
Yeah, it's a good question. I can't really say that we see a problem in communication coming from DJS. We know that DJS hosted a series of like lunch and learns throughout the interim. They have been going and meeting with law enforcement locally to answer their questions, to make sure that they understand that how the law works and provide like training opportunities. It might be that we need to have additional training for law enforcement if they are not understanding how the law works. But I don't really think that it's a communication issue as far as DJS is concerned or OPD is concerned or any, you know, like there's good understanding. There's a lot of communication, a lot of information that has been going out about how the law works and what you're supposed to do. But it looks like there might be additional need for law enforcement to receive additional education and training so that they understand if indeed they still have questions about how it operates.
Okay, thanks, Alice.
Thank you everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate you coming, especially to all of our legislators who are such strong champions for kids. We cannot say enough how much we appreciate you. So thanks again, and we'll remain here if anyone has any questions about the report, but thanks for joining us.